All right. Hi, my name is Ashton Epstein. This is Tolerable Politics, and today we are going to be talking about death penalty. This is episode 1. I'm here with my close friend Kyle, and
I
yeah, I think we'll disagree on a few things. So, Kyle, if you want to go ahead and explain your opinion on the death penalty, go ahead.
Death penalty good. All right, Ashton, your turn. No, I think the death penalty is not mandatory, but it's definitely I think it should be encouraged because it would so views like when it should be used. I think that if you have genuine malice towards a person, like I forget if it's first, second, or third degree murder where you have plans to intentionally kill a person,
Mhm.
I think that should be punishable by death. Because if you're plotting to take someone's life, then I think it's fair that you should expect to have your life taken. I don't think it should be applied in cases of manslaughter or self-defense,
Mm.
because that's just accidental or defending yourself. Um, Petty crimes, I don't think should be applicable to the death penalty. Basically, if you take a life and you intentionally mean it, then I think that that should be applicable for the death penalty. As far as the uses, how the death penalty shall be administered, um, right now the lethal injection thing is like it works, but Ryan, but you know, I think that firing squad would be cheaper, and
Yeah.
bullet in the head is a lot cheaper than spending like 13 grand on a dose of chemicals that in recent years have declined in its effectiveness.
Hmm.
So that's my take.
Okay, so for me, I think for this conversation, we're going to be sticking mainly to what the death penalty would look like in our current prison system because I'm not sure what your take on the prison system is, but mine personally is that it should be mainly for recovery and kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
helping people because most crime is caused by just bad situations and mental illness. So, in my opinion, prisons should be there to recover people. So, I think that if somebody is committing a crime and going to prison, even if it's murder, they should not be killed in that system. They should try to be reintroduced to society later after being helped by a psychiatrist or something. But in the current system, I do think that the death penalty should be allowed under very specific circumstances. There are two main reasons, and maybe more than that, but let's start with two, that I believe people should not be killed as often. So the first big one is that anywhere between 2 to 10% of all of our sentencing and convictions are false. So by having a death penalty, and especially a death penalty that happens often, we're having at least 2 to 10% of the people we're killing be completely innocent. And I think that one innocent life is worth far more than 100 guilty lives. And even though people might deserve to die, because we have to accept our system is flawed, it's very difficult to justify a flawed system being able to kill people because, again, it's 2 to 10%. Even on the lower end of that, 2%, I think it's something like 42,000 convictions are false every year, and whatever percentage of those is going to be, for murder, and 10% of those people, 2 to 10% of those people, are going to be innocent. And over time, that's a lot of innocent people that the state would be killing. So that's the first major reason why I think that it would be bad. And the second reason, definitely, um, it's again for that rehabilitation type thing. Uh, and sorry, not the rehabilitation. It's about the eye for an eye type of deal. We know that eye for an eye sentencing is very very essentially unfair because it's essentially asking for a directly equal punishment to what the crime has been done, and the main issue is that that kind of punishment is usually unfair in some way because let's say like again I kill your dad, you're saying that I should be able to be killed. But again, there is a bit of an issue there because I might have killed your dad under very specific circumstances that would make it very unequal for me to receive the penalty. Um, yeah, so it's in those situations, it's an unequivalent punishment. And again, the goal we're going to eventually strive for is going to be to rehabilitate pretty much everybody. And the only way we can get to that goal is if we stop killing people now and just try to rehabilitate them. So,
Okay, I agree with most of that. Um, I'm not really. I'm not gonna say I believe in eye for an eye, but I think it's a personally. I think it's a fair system because if you're example, if one man kills another man, and then that man isn't killed because he killed another man, I mean, I don't know. Something of that doesn't settle correctly.
mhm.
So that might just be like ideologue differences, but
Yeah,
I was, I'm, I don't know. I feel like if you kill someone, you should be expected. The user should be like, "Well, I just killed someone. I should be expected to be killed."
okay.
Type deal.
So, again, the main issue I have with that is let's say that the person that killed someone else is a paranoid schizophrenic, and it's obviously not something they could decide they wanted to or didn't want to do. They just kind of killed someone because of the situation they were in. They were a paranoid schizophrenic, and they're sitting in the middle of a house with just one other person, and they have been off their meds because they can't afford them or something like that, right? Does that
Mm-hmm.
person really deserve to be killed? I think that that situation is very different from someone just going out and shooting someone. But even in the case of that, there are usually like the vast majority of the time that someone kills another person, it's because they're in a bad situation already, and that situation and circumstances uh, kind of changes the equation because if in a complete void someone killed somebody else with no influence at all, uh, I'm not even sure that would happen because I think most people rationally don't kill other human beings. I think there's some kind of mental flaw or gap in logic that can be fixed, right? And obviously the goal is to fix people instead of killing them, right?
Right. Mm. I see your point with that. Um, yeah, I don't really take issue to that then. Yeah, I did. For first part of your argument, that was I kind of didn't understand what you meant by different circumstances, but now that you've clarified that, so um, yeah, I mean, I think in the modern system, the death penalty should still exist, but as we curve towards that rehabilitation based prison system, I think it should definitely be phased out.
Yeah.
Um, especially, if we're starting recent or if we're starting now, or if the
Hmm.
goal is to start now, then I think we should start phasing it out to only severe crimes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So,
can you, what do you think of? Well, obviously, capital punishment is the death penalty, but I'm
mhm.
talking like crimes against one's country, like treason.
Treason. Okay, so real quick before I answer that, I just want to talk. Someone asked what was the stats on wrongful convictions. That's going to be 2 to 10% of all convictions are wrong, and we figured that out through DNA evidence and stuff. But even taking the low side of that number, which is the 2%, that's still a very large amount of people that are getting wrongly convicted every year. And again, I think the number is around 46,000 that are wrongly convicted every year on average. So, for one committing a crime against the country, so the first thing to get over for that question is going to be should a crime against someone's country be punished? Because I feel like in the country's criminal justice system, there's a conflict of interest right off the bat because everyone in that country is
Right.
going to be biased for that country. So I think it's very difficult for that country to decide on what's right. But it's really tough. Whistleblowers, like that kind of treason, where it's non-violent. Like I think if you're going around and killing people for like terrorist causes, that kind of stuff, I think that could be punishable by death, because that is someone that is in our current system, I would argue, unable to be rehabilitated. They've been kind of indoctrinated into a wrongful ideology, and we don't have prison systems right now that can like fully teach somebody how to think differently. So I think right now that is someone I would consider to be okay with getting killed. But let's say like a whistleblower, where what was the guy's name who has been in prison forever?
Snowden.
Yeah, Snowden, right? He's a whistleblower, and he actually exposed information from the government that was deemed unconstitutional to have happened, and the FBI did some unconstitutional stuff. So in that situation, where his information actually brought light on a situation that was completely unconstitutional, I do think that he should probably be pardoned, and I think that that kind of person, people that leak information, it's very circumstantial, because in that case, I don't believe that information harmed our country in any way besides just having the people lose trust in one of their institutions, and it was rightfully so that they lost trust in that institution, right? Because they did something completely wrong. I think that
Right.
if someone's leaking information to, say, like a terrorist organization, like if Snowden had gotten government information and military information and leaked that to like ISIS or something, that I would be okay with being punishable by death, because he is directly putting other people's lives at risk. And again, I don't think someone like him could necessarily be re-educated in our current prison system. So I think in
Yeah.
our current situation, it would be best to just end up killing him. So essentially, like what my reasoning behind any kind of conviction of death would be is, um, if that person would be unable to be rehabilitated in our current system, or would be either extremely violent in our current prison system, I would be okay with them being killed. So essentially, after their time in the prison system, if they would come back out and not have changed at all, then I think that person should just be killed instead of kept in the prison system. That way, we can save space in our prisons and
Yeah.
really just have a more monetarily efficient way of dealing with those kinds of people who are just going to keep locked up their entire life anyway.
Yeah. I talked about this death penalty thing like a couple of years ago in this little club, debate club we had at Palmer Ridge,
Mhm.
and one of these questions came up with one of the girls who was against the death penalty, and she said, "Well, is it cheaper to kill someone, or is it cheaper to have them?" Because the alternative to the death penalty, they said, was life in jail.
Yeah.
Right. So do you think it would be cheaper to kill someone, like just give them the death penalty, or do you think it would be cheaper to keep them in the prison system until
So
they die?
that's actually really interesting, because in our current system, keeping people in the prison system is actually cheaper because of all the legal processes that have to take place in order to put someone to death and the chemicals used currently. I think that we kind of need to make the death penalty more available, but just use it less,
Yeah.
where it needs to have less paperwork and just be a cheaper process. Because right now with lethal injection, I would actually argue that it's a pretty inhumane way of killing people. It's very painful and it actually lasts a while. Personally, this is gonna sound really bad, but I think the best way to kill people would be to do what they do with cows, and that's just drive a massive metal spike directly through the skull. It's an instant death, and yeah, it might be gory and it might look horrible, but it's a very humane way. It's gonna be painless, instantly kill the person, and it's gonna be very cheap because you just need a piston and a spike. So I think that's
Yeah.
what we should probably transition to, or find some other way of just immediately killing somebody by damaging their brain. I'm not sure exactly what that would be, but I think the spike and piston is just an efficient way to go about it.
Yeah. I think that firing squad would be a good alternative until we can get to instant death,
I mean,
guaranteed instant death.
firing squad. I don't know about like having a firing squad. If you're just talking about using like a gun to just shoot someone in the head, that's one thing. But I don't think we should line people up and then fire at them, because
Yeah.
at least shooting at a range would misses would probably happen, and it would be bad. So someone asked, is that not barbaric? So what I'm essentially looking for when it comes to a way to kill somebody, it doesn't really matter how advanced the technology is. What matters is that they feel no pain when they die, and that it's cheap and efficient at doing so. With the current chemicals we use, you can actually miss a lot. Like sometimes the chemicals are mixed wrong, and you have to get a precise amount of chemical for the body, because if you guess wrong, it can either be extremely more painful than it needs to be, or it just won't kill a person, and it'll just be in pain the entire time. With a spike through the head, I mean, you could argue it's barbaric, but I don't really think that's a good argument against doing it, because it doesn't really matter if something would be considered barbaric. It's the most effective way to kill somebody that we have right now. And again, I'm open to other ways. It's just, as far as I can tell, something like a spike to the head or a gunshot through the head is the most efficient way and cheapest way to kill somebody. That's also painless.
Yeah. So I just put the Wikipedia the first thing that comes up in Wikipedia and in the DM.
Okay.
So they use 3 drugs, and like you said, if those are mixed up, like if you have too much sedative and not enough respiratory and cardiac arrest drug, then you're going to be sitting there for a while struggling to breathe.
Yeah, and I think that with the current thing, like there are several situations where people get a lethal injection and they end up not dying. And now the question is, after they've received their lethal injection and don't die, do we give them another, or have they already served their sentence? And
Yeah, I
that's
survived my death
that's
sentence.
a really interesting question to ask. But
Yeah,
the other
like you
thing,
said, even if the drug is mixed correctly, people's bodies are built different. I mean, you can have this big bulky guy, and
mhm,
you can have a normal amount of lethal injection. He can come out living.
yeah,
So, like you said, it
exactly.
depends on the body type,
Hmm.
depends on how much they mix, and the question after that is, he's done. All right, send them away. He's free to go.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting because the person has served their sentence. They weren't sentenced to 2 lethal injections. They got a lethal injection. We messed it up. So do they deserve another one? And I think the answer is
Yeah,
probably yes, because we're trying to kill them. But
yeah. That
obviously,
comes down to like a literal interpretation.
yeah. And so someone in chat said, or even what they use for dogs and animals, it seems easy and quick. So that's a lethal injection. With animals, um, I'm not exactly sure what the composition is, but I do believe it is. It's not painful, but it's a very ineffective way of killing larger animals. With dogs and cats, and again, even with those dogs and cats, the reason why they do it the way they do is because family members usually like to be right there next to the animal when it dies,
Yeah.
and seeing that your cat's head explode isn't necessarily the best way to send your
A
loved
little
animal off.
anecdote. So, so we had a cat. His name was Kirby. He was a Siamese cat. I know, playing words, but so he suffered nerve damage in his
Hmm.
left leg because he ran into a French door. Basically just jacked up his nerves.
Hmm.
And during the latter half of his life, he lost control of his bladder.
Okay.
And so we had to go put him down because every morning we did just have to clean up piss
Yeah.
um, off of his bed.
Mm.
And so I wasn't there, but mom and dad took him to the vet and held him in his arms when they put him. So,
Yeah. It's
in instances like that I think lethal injection is almost required because I don't think that putting a spike to the cat's head and pulling the
mhm.
trigger and having go everywhere is like that, or
Yeah.
you send him to a crematorium and you get his ashes back.
Yeah.
So
The other thing there is that I'm not sure on the exact chemical compound that's used in dogs and cats to put them down, but one thing I'm sure of is it isn't nearly as complex as what we use for lethal injection, because we don't necessarily have to numb the pain as much in animals, and it might be easier to numb the pain. Um, yeah, again, I'm not super educated on what goes into a lethal injection and why it's there, but I know that every single chemical is important, at least for putting people down. And in animals, it is much more relaxed, so vets can use kind of more less humane chemicals to put an animal down, as long as it happens quick, right? But we're looking for the most humane way to put people down, and again, that's going to be instant death. And I think the best way to achieve instant death is either like a spike through the head or like a shotgun shell. And again, I think the reason why people use lethal injection for animals is because family members usually like to be there with the animal, and it again would be pretty scarring to see your dog's head blown off to put it down. You'd want something more, well, less gory, so you go for the lethal injection. Yeah, wrongful convictions I think is the biggest argument against the death penalty because without a very large number of wrongful convictions, I think the death penalty in our current system would be a very effective way to deal with certain inmates. Again, I think that we should reform the prison system to have it be more about uh, helping people than punishing them. But under our current circumstances, where we don't have that prison system, I think that the death penalty would be a very efficient way to deal with people if we can convict them 100% accurately.
Ooh, the good question. Do you think the death penalty is a deterrent?
Okay, so is the death penalty deterrent?
Kind of. I mean, no
Honestly,
one likes to die, but then
on
you have those people who are insane, like Manson,
yeah,
who like I want to do as much stuff, like kill me if you want, like I don't care.
yeah,
So it depends on the person really, because there's some people who are just like jacked up in the head who don't really care, and
hmm
there's some people who, um, are scared of dying.
yeah. So I thought I had the answer to this, and I actually do. So there have been several studies on whether death penalty deters crime because there are certain countries in the world that don't have death penalty, and there are others that do. So what we do is we look at the crime before and after those laws are in place, and there's actually no evidence at all that the death penalty deters any crime whatsoever. Um, yeah, I can't find a single study that has any kind of difference between the crime with a death penalty or the crime without one, and changing those things doesn't increase or decrease crime either. So the death penalty has no effect on crime rate. It just has an effect on what we do with the people once they're convicted. The authorities can use the death penalty as a tool to get more info, I guess. I'm not really sure what the implications of that would be exactly, but I definitely can understand like using it as kind of like
Do
a
this or
way.
we'll kill you.
Yeah,
Type
basically,
deal.
if you want, we're gonna kill you, but if you give us this information on your boss, then we'll just give you a shorter sentence instead of killing
We
you.
might let you live. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that all comes down to if the person fears death.
Yep,
Because,
but I would also argue because police officers are actually allowed to lie to people they are holding. They're allowed to lie to anybody, so they can actually just say they're going to kill the person without there actually being a death penalty.
yeah.
And if it's not legal, I mean that's one thing. But also, I don't think criminals in the care of officers really a understand what's legal most of the time, or b care if it's legal or not. They just kind of expect the officers to do what they're gonna say. And because they're allowed to lie, I think that we don't need a death penalty. It could be illegal, and the officers can just lie about it. Not to mention, some people actually do fear being in prison the rest of their life more than they would death.
Yeah.
So it's actually beneficial for people. Um, I'd like to take it back a couple steps, go back to what you were talking about for what was it? It was cost of efficiency, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
talking about cost efficiency for the death penalty, it is actually, as I was saying, cheaper to keep somebody in the prison system for their entire life, and that's a really bad look for the death penalty because the main reason we'd want to kill somebody under our current system is to essentially free up space in the prisons and spend less money because putting someone to death theoretically would be cheaper, but because again of the lethal injection system we have and because of all the legal processes that have to go down, it is going to be much more expensive to put somebody to death. And I think that that's a very big issue, and I think that's another reason why we need to, if anything, reform the death penalty, because right now it is very ineffective. If we were just to maintain lethal injection, I think it would be better to just get rid of it because it's just ineffective. The reason why we have death penalty is to put less burden on the state for that person, but if that person's going to be putting more burden on the state to put them to death, then we might as well just not put them to death. So I think what I would advocate for in our current system is death penalty reform, and again, I think that it'd be best to make it more available and also encourage it to be used less.
Most European countries have. I think most European countries have banned the death penalty. I think Austria was the first one to ban it.
Yeah,
But I think the U.S. and a couple of. I know the Middle East has it, and North and Middle Africa. But I think what constitutes, I think it's just kind of like a socioeconomic, like a development standpoint for countries. Like non-developed countries tend to have the death penalty more often than developed countries. Is what I've noticed.
Yeah. Underdeveloped countries usually use it as a easier means than the prison system because they don't have a fully developed prison system yet. So it's more efficient for those countries to use it. But again, for our purposes, we're dealing with first world countries. I'm just looking up which countries have a death penalty real quick. So, as far as I'm concerned, most Nordic countries, all three of them, all three of the Nordic countries, they all have the death penalty outlawed, and they are the top three lowest crime rates in the world. I think crime rate isn't determined by kind of punishments. It's more determined by the situations people are put in and whether they feel forced to do something or not.
Yeah.
The largest cause of crime in this country is going to be finance and where someone's at in life, and then also two things: finance and then mental stability. So again, the main thing we need to do with our prison system is we're not looking for a deterrent. We're looking for something that can help people and make them better. Because rational people don't just go out and commit crimes if they're thinking rationally. They only do it if they're in a situation that kind of requires them to, or again, they have a very poor mental state.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. On that website, it did say that keeping someone in the prison system was generally cheaper than putting them to death.
yeah,
So, because you have to take the court cost, pre-court, the appeals cost, all that stuff, the actual cost of the injection.
it's
Someone has to
it's
pay that.
it's a lot of money, and yeah. So I think the answer we're looking for when it comes to uh, the prison system, or not the prison system, but the death penalty in general, is going to be right now we need to reform it. There are many flaws with many systems in the United States right now, but yeah, I think that a lot of this country does need reform. If we want to transition from just death penalty, we can just go to the prison system as a whole, if you want, since I think we've covered pretty extensively the death penalty.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then maybe we should spend the extra saved money on rehabilitating prisoners who can be rehabilitated, drug addicts, etc. So the thing about that is most people actually can be rehabilitated. Again, the two biggest issues are finance and being mentally disabled, and both of those things are treatable. By making a more educated population that's able to make and spend money better. To give people who are mentally disabled or have a mental disease proper medication for that disease. There are lots of different things we can do for that. I think the vast majority of people that even kill others are recoverable, and we can rehabilitate them with a proper system. So, why don't we get onto that system and talk about the specifics there? Um, yeah. So, general prison system stuff. What is your kind of like ideal utopian, I guess, prison system? If you just want to go ahead.
Um, I think the utopian prison system would be that someone commits a crime, they're sentenced for X amount of years to reside in this prison system, and they are shown from the get go that it's not a punishment system. We're going to rehabilitate you mainly through labor, not like hard labor, but like um, pursuing a career or being productive
Mm,
could instill some sense of discipline into people, saying, I have a responsibility, I have to do that. What I did was wrong.
mm,
Because if you tell someone what you did was wrong and I'm going to beat you up for it, they're going to be like, okay, what did I learn?
yeah.
That was wrong. Now, it's like, you know, it doesn't help. But if
Hmm.
someone says, oh, it's, it was wrong, but this is what you can do to help prevent that, and just this is what you can do to go back into society. because right now the stigma is that if you're in prison, you're in prison
Mhm.
for a long time, and then if you get out and manage to reform yourself by yourself, then you won't go back in most of the
Mhm.
time. But most of the time, it's just um, youth and adults who, it's a vicious cycle. They keep
Mhm.
they get out for 5 years and then they commit another petty crime and they're back in for 10 years. And the process rinse and repeat until the guy's 50,
Yeah.
and then he finally learns to not commit crime. And by that time, 30, 30 years of your life is gone.
Mhm.
So, but I think I saw a video actually. I think it was Norway or Finland had a prison system where they would it's life in prison, right?
Mhm.
But the prisons were apartment cells.
Mhm.
Like they were like pretty well furnished, internet
Oh
connection,
yeah,
TV,
I've
prison
seen that.
system.
Yeah.
Yeah, where the guy in the video that they interview committed a crime. I think he killed someone,
Mhm.
and he was reformed, and now he's specializing in IT. So
Yeah.
he'll spend the rest of his life in that prison, but
Mhm.
he's still contributing to society. He's making money. He can go out and spend money on things he wants for himself, etc. There's no
Mhm.
limitations. There's actually no fences in the facility.
Yeah. So
So
like, what facility Kyle's referring to right now is I forget. It's not the entire prison system. It's a specific prison they have in it's in one of the Nordic countries. But essentially they treat their prisoners like customers almost. They treat them. They keep the prisoners inside of hotel room-esque rooms. They have TV service. They eat good food. They have games. They can interact with each other all they want, and they try to essentially put them back in school and get them going through an education system to just get them solid jobs. And they help them. They help them out. They give them psychiatrists to help recover, to help treat their mental illness if they have any. And they really just help these people instead of trying to punish them. It's like it's almost a place you'd want to go. And they send them back out, and they have a massive, massive rate at of successful reintroductions to society. I think the I forget what the word is, but the amount of people that come back to the prison are it's an extremely low number. It's sub like 0.1%. Most people will just go into the system once, go to that place, and then they're out for good. It's a really really good place, and again, I'm not sure that that kind of thing could be instituted all across a country like the United States, but I think that we could work towards something like that, where prisoners are less treated like subhumans and more like people who need to be helped. Essentially, that's what I think the prison system should essentially be is just a system where we ensure the people are there because we know they have a problem and we're trying to fix that problem.
yeah, I agree with that. Certainly. Um, the question then is, how do we get to that? What's
Yeah,
the transition?
that's a very very good question.
Because right now, well, let's talk about private versus public prisons.
Okay.
Because I know that some private prisons are a bit more harsh and work towards the money
Hmm.
than public prisons.
Yeah.
And then the problem with public prisons is that you don't get enough staff to um, coerce the prisoners to behave.
Hmm.
And even then, for the public prisons, it could be too overcrowded,
Hmm.
etc.
Yeah.
So the public prisons face all the problems that government facilities have,
Hmm.
and then with the private prisons, it's more of a greed thing.
Yeah. So the main difference I see between these two things, there are several, but a couple of the big ones is going to be anything really government run right now, especially like our prison system and some other institutions such as education. They're extremely underfunded by the government. They need a lot more funding. We put way too much money into military. That's something that I think most people agree on when they really look at the numbers. Um, Way too much military spending, way too much spending on certain other things, and we just don't have the money for our prison system. So you have a lot of these prisons that are operating, in good faith, but they just really are crumbling almost, and they just don't have the infrastructure. They can't renovate anything. They're just kind of 50-year-old facilities that are barely working out, and
Yeah,
that's the main issue with the government side of things. And then the issue with privatized privatized prisons is that they are going to be only in it for the money. There's no government incentive to recover, help people recover. There's no incentive for bringing down your prison return rate. So people you send out have a lower chance of going back into society, or lower chance of going back into the prison system. They don't get rewarded for that kind of thing. So what a private prison's going to be motivated by is just the capital, and that's going to be jamming a bunch of prisoners into one area, cutting budgets on prisoner remedies, just essentially keeping these people alive as cheap as possible, and jamming as many of them together into a small space as possible, just to save money everywhere, and then make as much money as possible. I think that could be a good transitional phase, like having prisoners or their families pay extra to go to the prisons where rehab happens. But the issue there is that again, most people are going to the prison system because they are poor. That's a very very large majority of people going into the prison system, and that's essentially locking those people out of their recovery. I think personally the best way to go about it is to have either vastly just state prisons and have the state prisons get more funding and make them better, or to incentivize privately owned prisons to bring down the rate at which people are turned to the prison system, so it actually has to fix them. So you have good financial incentives for them to try and figure out how to do that, and maybe even punish them if someone they send back into society ends up coming back into the prison system, just to really make it so they are extremely motivated to help fix people instead of harm them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Um, I want to gather some of your opinions about the practices that some of our prisons use. Example being solitary confinement and
yeah,
gang violence in prisons, stuff like that. Not
yeah.
and that's not an institution that the prison uses, but it happens in almost every prison.
Yeah, so gang violence in prisons, I'll start there because I think it's much easier to address. It's something that's very, very difficult to figure out because, obviously the government doesn't know everything about gangs and
Right.
who's in them. So the best thing to do there is to ensure that people who are suspected to be part of the same gang are separated as much as possible. And really, I think it just comes down to monitoring prisoners better to ensure that they don't have any contraband, to ensure that a lot of a lot of the stuff that could happen doesn't. So I'd be okay with monitoring prisoners everywhere, including in bathrooms. I know that is a very big violation of privacy, but I think they've given up their right to privacy by committing crimes in the first place. So I'd be okay with
Yeah.
prisoners being watched at all times to ensure they can't make any contraband or don't have any contraband. Make sure they never have any weapons of any kind, and just ensure that they're all acting correctly, not really gathering too much to do harmful things. It's okay if they want to gather to play games or whatever, but
Yeah.
I think that it's very important we survey them at all times. And again, that's going to help with the recovery aspect of things too, to make sure they aren't doing anything that would harm their recovery. And then for the
Solitary
yeah,
confinement.
for the solitary confinement, I definitely think that solitary confinement is a cruel or unusual punishment. Human beings are social creatures, and we have several studies on the effects of keeping somebody in solitary confinement for an extended period of time. It's completely, completely immoral and very, very terrible. Even at
Yeah.
the 3 day mark of being confined in solitary confinement, it has some disastrous mental effects. It doesn't cause any permanent damage, I don't think, but you get up to like a week in solitary confinement and it starts causing permanent damage.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very bad for someone's psyche, and I think
Yeah.
that it should not be allowed. It definitely is unconstitutional. It is a cruel or unusual punishment. It's extremely cruel to people to keep them in
Yeah.
solitary.
Mm-hmm. And I was actually reading up on this like a week ago. But I think there was a guy who was in solitary confinement for like a good couple months, if that. Um, and he developed psychosis. He had anxiety and he had depression. Like all these mental issues stemmed from this one guy being in a roomless window by himself for 3 months.
Mhm.
And there are cases of people being in solitary confinement for much, much, much longer than
Yeah.
that. But I agree with you there. It's definitely a form of cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah.
because and yeah. Um, one just crossed my head. This isn't an institution, but this is just kind of something with the justice system in general.
Hmm.
Is people like I see a lot of this where people will complain that they were sentenced to like this is obviously an extreme exaggeration, but like they were sentenced to life in prison for carrying 5 grams of marijuana on them,
Yeah.
but this other guy gets sentenced for 5 years because he killed someone.
Yeah.
Like,
So
and that
I
has to do with different state justices and stuff like that. But it's kind of
yeah,
whack.
I think we can kind of pull that back to you know, it's very much kind of a deal where we have to accept our justice, or yeah, our justice system is very flawed right now. And again, that's another argument for why we can't really have the death penalty and why we need to reform our prisons to make sure that if someone gets wrongly accused, they're not going to be suffering for 30 years of their life, right? Because it does happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a third strike law. So third strike laws do come into effect, but there are also rulings across the United States where you will see in certain states people get put in prison for life off of a first count of drug possession or dealing, and you can see people with manslaughter or murder charges seeing less time. It just depends on the state and their laws and the justice and what their opinion on the thing is as well.
Yeah, because
It
their justice is perfect.
Yeah, so it's a very flawed system, and again we have to accept
Yeah,
that. It's the definitely the best system or one of the best systems in the world, I would argue, but because we have
it's
to
still
accept it's
flawed.
flawed,
Yeah,
we need to make sure that the punishments are adequate for the amount of flaws it has.
yeah. And the problem there would be designating almost like a rule book for how much time should be served for each type of sentence.
Yeah.
But then again, if that rule book were created, it would be so long and
Hmm.
so it would have to be a government effort
Yeah.
to be enforced upon the states, which
So
I know a lot of people wouldn't be a fan of.
yeah, the issue I have with that is that it would have to be very 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 long. There are so many
Yeah,
subjective like little minuscule things that have to take into account for every situation, and that's why we have a justice system, and that's why we have jurors come in. That's why we have a judge. It's because there are so many minute differences between every case that need to be accounted for in the final decision that you can't really just make a an algorithm to determine how much
yeah,
time someone has to spend or whether they're guilty or innocent. It is a very long, grueling, complex process, and really it does have to be determined by someone's best judgment until we get something like a much more advanced artificial intelligence that can figure that out on its own.
yeah.
But
Hmm.
I definitely think for now we do need to keep the system the way it is in order to maintain kind of subjective consistency, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Hmm.
So yeah, are there any other problems that you'd like to talk about in the prison system?
Um, not really. I guess one thing comes into mind, and that's bias in jurors and in the um God in the guard in prisons,
Hmm.
and much less so in guard in prisons because that doesn't really happen as much. But like mainly bias in jurors.
Yeah.
Like example, there's a study been done that wearing glasses in a court case actually reduces the percentage that you will be convicted guilty by
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
5 or 10%. So like and lawyers know that, so they'll have these clients dress up in glasses and stuff that they would never wear
Hmm.
in order for them to get every little percent down that they would be convicted.
Hmm.
And I think that's just kind of a bit ridiculous, but
Yeah.
it just has to play into biases with the jurors, and you can't really fix bias. It's taught,
Hmm.
especially racial bias, um, because I think that's what I'm leading into here is that a lot more often you see a black man being convicted of a crime than a white man, and that
Yeah.
there's so many factors that play into that. That's not the sole factor,
Hmm.
but it is noticeable.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of people just saying the number 1350, and you
Yeah,
kind of just have to cringe. So that number is essentially, statistically, black people are 13% of the population, and they commit 50% of the crime in the United States. And again, that's not because black people have crime genes or anything like that. It's because of
Yeah.
cultural and financial circumstances they're in. So there's a very very long story of what kind of leads to that number being the case. We can talk about that on a different time, but for now,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, in the justice system, it is just it's very biased. I think that the optimal way to run it will be in the pretty near future when we are able to make computer learning a viable thing for everyday use. We can probably have computers that are able to pretty quickly judge whether someone's guilty or innocent just based off of what evidence is there, or if it's unable to be determined based off the evidence. And again, it's not going to happen anytime soon, but in the future, probably during our lifetime, we'll see something like that that could be better than a jury system, because we do have a very flawed system. And you have things like what is it, personal anecdotes being the gold standard for evidence, and God knows personal anecdotes are some of the worst kind of evidence you can have. um, your brain can do all sorts of wacky stuff, and people misremember things. I mean, you can't remember what happened to you July 1st 2 years ago, and you can't expect
Yeah.
someone to testify that they actually do remember something 2.5 years ago. So
Sometimes people just flat out lie
yeah.
just to make themselves look better.
hmm Sometimes
So
police officers can make deals with people as well,
yeah,
and
bribes.
they can bribe, or it could just be something that influences people. I mean, you can have your memory changed and influenced just by people asking a question a certain way. Even it's really interesting in psychology. If you're doing a study on certain things like a survey, you have to be very very careful about the way you word a question, because you could word the question like you show somebody a video of a car crashing, right? And you say, did car A uh, hit car B, or did car A slam into car B? And many more people are going to say, no, the car didn't slam. It was a fender bender, just kind of bumped it. So they'll answer no. And you could have the bump question, people answer yes a lot more, where they're asking the same thing essentially, just using different words. And it causes people to remember it differently.
Mm-hmm.
So really interesting stuff. But yeah, one thing to always keep in mind is that your brain is very very difficult to trust. You can't really trust much of your memory, and you can't really trust other people's memory either. You really have to come down to just from logical evidence. That's why cameras are so nice these days, because we can actually have video evidence that we can see all the way from years ago now. So that makes things a lot easier in the criminal justice system. But again, the gold standard right now in the criminal justice system is uh, anecdotal evidence, and anecdotal evidence in any kind of debate is always just thrown out the window right away. It's very very illogical. It shouldn't be used in the way it is. But yeah, again, just many flaws with our prison system and our judicial system as a whole.
Yep. Laws.
Yes.
Gotta love them. Well, I don't really have anything else on my mind.
I don't think so either. I think that's probably a pretty all
It was a
right.
good. It was a good 48-minute discussion.
Yeah. If anybody in the chat has any questions they'd want to ask, go right ahead. We'll give it a
What's the
couple
next
minutes.
topic?
And
What's the next topic?
next topic, no idea. Yeah, honestly, not a clue. If anyone wants to see anything in specific, you can go ahead and
Yeah.
put it down in the chat.
Ooh. Question for me. Do you have a schedule yet for this?
I don't have a schedule yet. I think I'm gonna be filming, so streaming and filming mostly on Sundays. I might do it
Okay.
more often, but for now the plan is going to be once every Sunday. That could change very soon, depending on what happens. But yeah.
Works for me. Ooh. Excuse me. Cool.
All right. Well, uh, thank you all for being here and watching. I appreciate it, and we'll be sure to do this again next week.